Well, welcome everyone. I'm Alexis Glidewell. I'm the social worker in the geriatrics department here. Most of you know me. See lots of familiar faces. If we haven't met before, you will probably see me if you accompany your loved one to their appointments in our clinic. I've been officially part of this team since the summer and have been teaching these classes in partnership with the team since, since the clinic started about just close to 6 years ago. So lots of you are familiar from these classes. Some of you are familiar from the clinic. And it's good to see all of you here. It was great to see such a large turnout. And like I said, we had 31 people sign up for this class today. So we've got cramped quarters, but I think that's a good problem to have. Today we're going to be talking about specific communication strategies when we're working with a person who has a neurocognitive impairment. And this is actually a curriculum that I've been teaching for about 15 years. It's part of a 4-week class offered through the California Caregiver Resource Centers called It Takes Two: Understanding Dementia Behavior. This particular class is one that I teach time and time and time again because I think it's one of the most fundamental challenges when you're caring for a person with whom you have a previous history, a previous way of relating, and who has neurocognitive impairments now that might make communication extra tricky when we're trying to navigate changes, remember context, and also holding our history with the person for whom we provide care. So it can get pretty complicated. Hi. So for folks who are just coming in, welcome. We are filming today, but the camera's just on me. So please don't worry about being in the film. It's for purposes of putting it on our website so that folks who can't make it to the classes will be able to see them online. And you can also get them online as well. So let's go ahead and get started so that we have time to cover all of the curricula today. Before we jump into communication strategies, I really am a stickler for context because if we don't know what we're working with, it's really, really hard to have a game plan. So some of you have heard me say this before, and if you come to any other classes or meet with me at all, you're going to hear me say it over and over and over again because I think the context makes such a huge difference. When we have realistic expectations of our loved one, as well as realistic expectations of ourselves, then we're able to come from a place of adaptability that makes more sense. So when you hear the word dementia, how do you define it?
Mental decline.
Mental decline. What else?
Memory loss.
Memory loss. It's a big one.
Confusion.
Confusion.
Shrinking brain.
Shrinking brain.
Change in personality.
Change in personality. Agitation, that can come up. So kind of the whole big picture. We've talked before, if you've come to our intro class, if you've come to the Caregiver 101 class, about the fact that dementia itself is an umbrella term. It's not a term that is in itself a diagnosis. It's more that umbrella that covers multiple diagnoses. So in Latin, dementia means the breakdown of the brain, dementia. And people can arrive at having dementia symptoms from multiple causes. Alzheimer's dementia, vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementia, Parkinson's-related dementia, Lewy body dementia. I could stand up here all day and talk about different illnesses that can cause dementing symptoms. Dementia is that overall umbrella, and for purposes of this class, I'm defining it as impaired intellectual capacity with lack of ability to use good logic and reasoning and memory impairment. So in the intro class, we talked about cognition. What is cognition? Cognition is all of our thinking skills, not just memory, but some of the other things that folks talked about. Judgment, impulse control, problem solving, reasoning, logic. So our cognition is affected when we have a dementia or a neurocognitive impairment. So it's important to know it's not just memory, because sometimes when we're trying to communicate with someone, and if we think that the only thing going on with them is their memory and all this behavioral stuff is just, calculated, or, they've just always been this way, and we attribute it to historic contexts, we might be missing opportunities for connection in terms of communication. Does that make sense? So impaired intellectual capacity, meaning difficulty learning new things, difficulty problem solving, abstract thinking, logic and reasoning, and memory impairment. It's important we remember what people with dementia maintain, however: instinct, intuition, and emotion. So if people are operating from instinct, intuition, and emotion, that's really our foot in the door. So we have to do a kind of decided mental gear shift when we're trying to communicate with someone who's really no longer able and available here at this intellectual level. The goal for communication has to shift from intellect to heart, or gut to gut. So we're going to go through specific principles and tips today for what that looks like. Now, I'm going to tell you, probably nothing I'm going to cover today is earth-shatteringly new news for you. It's probably all stuff you've heard before. I'm hopeful that today you'll have a better idea of what it looks like to use some of these strategies. I'm going to give some specific examples and vignettes from my own experience working with folks who've had neurocognitive impairments, and hopefully help troubleshoot. But what about when that doesn't work? What's realistic? What's not realistic? Why might it not be working? And is our goal realistic? Is what does success mean? I think we get tripped up there quite often. Well, that didn't work for me because X, Y, and Z. Sometimes what I define as a successful communication interaction, a family might not think was successful. So if the behavior doesn't cease, does that mean I was unsuccessful? If it comes up again, does that mean I was unsuccessful? So what's a realistic expectation here? I'm going to pass around some handouts here. The first one we're going to go through together is Principles for Understanding and Communicating with a Person with Dementia. So for purposes of time, I'm aware not everyone has one yet, but we're going to just go ahead and just go through these together. The first one here: understand what is and isn't possible to change by learning all you can about the disease. Knowing and accepting the cognitive limitations of the person will help you set realistic expectations for the person's behavior. If you're taking notes, I would suggest putting as well as for myself. So we're not just talking about setting realistic expectations for the person with the neurocognitive impairment. That's a big piece of it. If we're assigning meaning to their behavior that is not accurate in this context, then we're setting ourselves up. However, often we set up unrealistic expectations for ourselves as well when we think it's our responsibility to help someone with a neurocognitive impairment understand and remember going forward. If I had a nickel for every time someone asked me, how can I get her to remember she can't drive anymore? How can I get him to understand he has dementia? I'd be a rich woman. But the expectation that you and I have to come up with some kind of silver bullet response or intervention to help someone with dementia understand and remember going forward is a real unrealistic expectation and burden that we put on ourselves. In order to have someone with dementia understand and remember moving forward, what do we have to do? We have to cure them of their dementia. Because if they could remember and understand going forward, they no longer have the features of the dementing illness, correct? So we can unload that burden from our shoulders. It's not my responsibility, nor is it realistic for me to expect that I need to help someone remember that the doctor told them they need to take the blue pill now. How many of you have caught yourself saying, remember? I've done it. Remember, we don't do it this way anymore. Remember, it's not safe for you to drive. Remember, you live here now. Remember, he died. And of course, we know intellectually they're not remembering. But sometimes in the fast-paced mix of trying to keep all the plates spinning, we forget. And it's also our heart's desire that they remember. So it's really, really tricky. If your loved one has a diagnosis for the cause of their dementia symptoms, my best advice for you is to get all the information you can get about that specific diagnosis. That will help you get even more clarity and context around what's going on with them and set realistic expectations. If your loved one has a diagnosis of frontotemporal dementia and they lack inhibition and impulse control, and they're having difficulty with speech and language, those are markers of that diagnosis. If your loved one has Lewy body dementia and they're having intense visual hallucinations and some motor symptoms, those are markers of that diagnosis. I'm not going to talk someone into understanding that there's not really a bumblebee flying around their face if they think there is. So the more we know about the diagnosis of our loved one, the better prepared we are to accommodate their symptoms, and the better prepared we are to be realistic with ourselves. It grieves me that she doesn't understand there's not a bumblebee flying around in front of her face. It's hard for me to see her this way. However, I know that's a marker of her disease, and I can't cure that. So it's not about just resigning to it and all's well with the world. I'm acutely aware that it's painful to cease and desist from trying to fix it. We have to grieve that. At the same time, the grief is more accurate than the frustration around thinking we need to fix it, and if we only worked hard enough, or if they only cared about our efforts enough, things would get better. That's not accurate. Does that make sense? Context is so important. Know what you're working with and work from there. Number 2, understand that our thoughts, attitudes, and actions significantly impact on the behavior of the person with dementia. I see some heads nodding. Have any of you had that experience? There's a seat up here. Have any of you had that experience where you've noticed that you're very stressed and they get more agitated? On the days that you have less bandwidth, they seem to push your buttons a little bit more? If you think about it from that instinctive, intuitive, emotional place, people with dementia are picking up on our nonverbal cues. They're not paying so much attention to our words that have to be processed through a brain that's not processing accurately. They're paying more attention to our nonverbal cues, our energy, our facial expression, our tone of voice, our movements. Anybody have ever had the experience of being in the room when a brand new father or mother or sibling who's never held a baby before holds a newborn who was just born? Anybody seen that? And they have the loveliest intentions. They want to be so gentle because that baby's so delicate. So they hold the baby like this. The intention is lovely. This is a precious, delicate baby, and I don't want to bruise it by holding it too tight. I love this baby so much, I want to be so careful. What does the baby do? Cries. Why? Why doesn't the baby say, thank you very much for being so considerate and loving me so much that you take the time to think about being so gentle with me?
Afraid of falling.
Maybe he's just afraid of falling.
He doesn't feel secure.
Doesn't feel secure. The baby's not aware of our intention. Baby doesn't appreciate our intention because baby's not aware of our intention. Baby's only operating here. Few minutes old. They don't have language, logic, and reasoning, a whole heck of a lot of memory. But there's a lot of communication that can take place here at this gut level. What's the message here? That's the need. What's the message? What are we conveying? The person responsible for holding my life in the balance is unsure of themselves. Therefore, I'm in danger. Ah!
They pick up fear.
They pick up the fear. Absolutely. So please don't leave today and say, she said adults with dementia are just like babies. I'm not saying that. I think adults with dementia need to be treated with the dignity and respect of adults with adult accomplishments. What I am saying is their brains are often operating at the same level because their brain is undeveloping and a baby's brain hasn't yet developed. So there's no grief associated with a baby operating from this survivalistic, intuitive, instinctive place. We expect that. They haven't yet developed. There's grief associated with an adult operating the same way who once did have more cognitive capabilities. We have to make that distinction. However, the intervention, the way of connecting is similar because what they have available for connection is similar. Does that make sense? So the message conveyed to the baby here is, the person responsible for holding my life in the balance is unsure of themselves, therefore I'm in danger. The message is not, oh, my mom loves me so much, she's being so gentle. She doesn't want to hurt me. She's being so careful. That's not the message. Because the baby's experience is their reality. And a person with dementia's experience is also their reality. If I feel it, it is so. I'm picking up on the fear. And if I feel fear, there's something wrong. They're not saying, I feel fearful. Let me check that feeling against data and evaluate whether or not I really have a realistic threat. They're not doing that. If I feel it, it is so. Have you ever seen a nurse hold a newborn baby? They swaddle them so tight, I think their eyes are going to pop out. Exactly right. And they hold them like this, and they burp them like this, and the new parents are doing this, and wondering why the baby's still crying, or they're rocking like this, and the nurses are doing this. What's the message here?
I got your back.
Literally, right? Quite the opposite. The person responsible for holding my life in the balance is sure of themselves. Therefore, I can be confident I'm safe. No language or logic or reasoning or memory. Just intuitive, instinctive, survivalistic experience. A lot of communication, however. Now, the nurse doesn't love the baby more than the mother or the father or the new sibling. Nurse doesn't have better intentions. Nurse just knows how to convey security. Does that make sense? So this is a big one, number 2 here. Really understanding. That doesn't mean bottle up your emotions. If you're having a tough day, you may want to be aware of what you're bringing into the room. And at least be aware, boy, I'm really raw today. I'm pretty anxious, or I'm kind of cranky. I'm a little tired. They might pick up on that. This might be a tough day. There might not be a solution to that, given the resources we have. We can't just say, oh, it's an off day for me, so I'm taking a break, unless we have respite. But we can say, oh, it's an off day for me, note to self. They might be picking up on it. Does that make sense? Number 3, if you remember nothing else from this entire class, remember number 3 today. Recognize that behavior, even in a confused person, more than likely results from a cause. Something triggers the behavior. And if you're taking notes, I would suggest writing down behavior is always the attempt to fill an unmet need. That's true for you, that's true for me, that's true in biology with single-celled organisms. We're biologically programmed to conserve energy. We don't act unless we perceive the need to act. I'll repeat that for folks who are taking notes. Behavior is always the attempt to fill an unmet need. This concept is the entire premise for one of the classes that we teach. So if you get the schedule of classes, the next class on dealing with difficult behaviors, that's where we're working from. This concept. Behavior is purposeful. So often it feels like behavior just happened out of the blue. I don't know where it came from, it just fell out of the sky. And sometimes we can go from 0 to 60 in no time, and it's hard to kind of break down what led up to the difficult behavior. But if we remember that behavior is always seeking to fill an unmet need, we can work from there and kind of put on our detective caps. What's behind this behavior? What is this behavior about? Rather than getting hooked into the behavior itself or the words themselves, remember, speaking is a behavior. So rather than getting hooked into the words or the behavior itself, if we can remind ourselves this behavior is seeking to fill a need, what might the need be? And we look at trying to help meet the need in that moment, then we get less hooked ourselves, and we're more problem solving, and we're a little bit more realistic around connecting with our loved one. It's not realistic to expect that you or I can meet everybody's unique needs all the time, and that's not the goal. It is realistic for us to expect that we can remember this behavior isn't about making my life more difficult. This behavior isn't about old ways of being, even though it looks and sounds and feels that way. This behavior is purposeful. And even if I can't meet the need, I can acknowledge the need and help my loved one understand, I see you, I hear you, I'm on your team, I'm an ally here. And even if I can't meet the need in that moment, I'm more likely able to keep the behavior from escalating. Most of the time, it's not the initial problematic behavior that drives us crazy. It's the tug of war all day long. it's the mushroom clouding of that behavior that drives us crazy. Again, when we don't have a lot of perspective, it can feel like it went from 0 to 60 in no time. It can feel like there was no process from initial problematic behavior to mushroom cloud. There's always a process. It might be this long or this long. If we can present ourselves as someone who's here to help meet a need, we're less likely to contribute to the behavior exacerbating. And that's all we have control over. We don't have control over whether or not a problematic behavior comes up. We don't have control over someone else's understanding or memory. We can't stop behavior from starting. We do have control over the degree to which we contribute to that problematic behavior exacerbating. Oftentimes, the behavior exacerbates because the need it's seeking to fill persists. And if we run in with logic and reasoning as the solution, oh, no, you don't need that. Remember, such and such. And then we get a big combative verbal explosion. And we think, gosh, they just don't appreciate. I'm trying to help them. We're assigning meaning that isn't really there. We've contributed to that explosion by introducing logic and reasoning, which is always, always gasoline on the fire. Sometimes our good logic and reasoning is water on the fire. Sometimes, if the conditions are right, if they are interested in changing their opinion or their mind, if they are interested in our opinion. But even when both parties are clear thinking, oftentimes my good logic and reasoning is not going to change someone else's mind if they have different political beliefs than I do. So what we mean as help isn't always experienced as helpful. Does that make sense? I talk about differentiating helpful intervention from doing stuff that's helpy. We feel really helpy, but it's not necessarily helpful when we use those interventions that don't really acknowledge the need here behind the behavior. So we're going to go through specific tips later on that exemplify what it might look like to do that. Remembering that behavior is always the attempt to fill an unmet need. That's true for you, for me, for people with neurocognitive impairments, for babies, for teenagers, for the rude person in line at the bank. Behavior is always an attempt to fill an unmet need. We have control over the meaning we assign to someone else's behavior, and we have control over our response to it. That's it. That's it. That's simultaneously kind of sad. We wish we had more control than that. But it's also kind of liberating. I don't have to try to fix what the best scientists in the world haven't been able to fix. I can grieve that it's not fixable, but I don't have to heap that burden of expectation on my shoulders because it's not realistic. Does that make sense? All I need to focus on is the meaning I assign to their behavior. That's why context is so important. The way I'm interpreting their behavior right now, does it make sense in light of their diagnosis? The way I'm interpreting their behavior right now, is it realistic given what I know in terms of their overall functioning? Am I assigning meaning that's more likely accurate or inaccurate in the context here? The meaning we assign to someone else's behavior determines to a large degree our response to it. If I assign meaning A, I'm going to have response A. And if I assign meaning B, I'm going to have response B. Does that make sense? If I interpret this behavior in the context of their historic way of being, she's always been difficult and narcissistic and controlling. I know some of your loved ones. Then I'm going to respond from that same place. She doesn't appreciate me. She's self-centered. She doesn't care about the effort I'm putting in. Meaning A determines or results in response A. If I assign meaning here, gosh, this looks and feels and sounds like her old way of being. But I understand with her diagnosis, she really can't calculate to that degree anymore. This is more reflexive, instinctive survival now. Then I'm going to have a response accordingly. Yeah, it's frustrating. Yeah, it's challenging, but it's not calculated. It's not personal. And that can kind of take the edge off. It makes a big difference for us. So the context makes a big difference when we're looking at helping to fill a need. We're going to approach that behavior based on the meaning we assign to it. And if we have accurate context, we're more likely to assign accurate meaning. So all of these principles kind of intertwine. Number 4, learn that to enhance communication with a person with dementia requires a commitment to remain connected regardless of the content of the conversation. Now, that's sometimes easier said than done. If the context of the conversation is puppy dogs and butterflies and all things lovely and wonderful, it's easier to remain connected there. If the content of the conversation is accusatory at me in particular, negative, it's going to be harder for me to stay connected there. What might be helpful in terms of maintaining that connection in those times when the context or the content of the conversation is uncomfortable for me? In terms of these principles, though, again, the context, the meaning we assign, and understanding that the behavior is an attempt to fill a need, it's never about me, even if they're using my name specifically. It's about their own need, and the behavior is seeking to fill it. If it feels like you're breaking into my house every night, you're breaking into my house every night. If I have a neurocognitive impairment, I'm not able to say, gosh, I just feel so vulnerable because I don't know which way is up. I don't have a yardstick for who's safe and what's safe. It feels just like you're breaking into my house every night. I feel violated and vulnerable. This darn disease. I don't have the ability to articulate that, nor do I have that kind of insight by definition if I have a dementia diagnosis. What I do have is my experience here, and feelings are not logical. It feels like you're breaking into my house, so you're breaking into my house. If I feel it, it is so. And if someone's breaking into my house, if I'm accusing you, what need might I have? A need to feel safe and secure, a need to feel like I have an ally in the world who believes me and will stand by me and support me. So when we reframe it and we think about the language in the context of the disease process, we assign more accurate meaning, it's easier for us to remain connected regardless of the content. If we're not doing that, then a lot of this content is going to be triggering for us. You've never appreciated me. I'm bending over backwards. I'm going to lose my job. And now you're accusing me? I'm breaking into your house? Buddy, you live in my house. It's not helpful. And we know as the words are coming out of our mouth, they don't understand it. And then we feel guilty and frustrated because we don't have a better method for connecting, and we let our frustration get the better of us again because we're human. If we have that context and we understand the previous principles we've discussed, then principle number 4 is a little bit easier. None of this is easy. So remain connected regardless of the content of the conversation. We're speaking here, remember, heart to heart or gut to gut versus intellect to intellect. The exchange of meaning versus the exchange of data. Does that make sense? I want to help meet the need at this meaningful level, not help someone understand and remember going forward. Breaks my heart, I can't do that. Breaks my heart, this is unrealistic. But when I've accepted that it is, then I can still connect here and connect at a more meaningful level, actually. Some of the purest human connections I've witnessed or been a part of have been with people who are pretty darn confused in a dementing illness process. And we'll watch some of those examples on the video clips we see at the end of class today. Because there's no pretense when we're here. We're just speaking about meaning and experience here. And when we do that, my experience, if their experience is their truth, if their feeling is their truth, then there's no argument. They're always right. Doesn't mean we're wrong. It's not us against them. Just they're right about how they feel. They're right about the need. And we're speaking there. We're interpreting this through a different set of language principles. Meaning versus information and data. Did you have a question?
Yes. Dementia, is this passed to family or no?
The question was whether or not dementia was inheritable. And I think that's determined by the diagnosis. There are certain risk factors that can be genetic, but we don't know a whole heck of a lot about the causes of a lot of the different types of dementias. So certain dementias, like a vascular dementia, that is, we're likely to get if we have certain risk factors, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, those certain things. Those risk factors can be genetic. We can talk more about that after class if you want more information. Yeah.
Is dementia progressive?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
Because of age or because the brain deteriorates, or why is that?
The brain deteriorates. So, yeah. The question was, is dementia progressive? Yes. So the brain continues to break down. Yeah. So principle number 5 here, if we're back to the principles, understand that changing behavior takes time, effort, and patience. Reward yourself often for working toward change. This does not say reward yourself often for never getting upset. Reward yourself often for getting it right all the time. Reward yourself often for working toward change. You're welcome. I'm passing out some other handouts. Also with number 5 here, whose behavior are we changing? Ours, right. So it's, we can't change a person with dementia's behavior. Their behavior is symptomatic of their disease process. But the truth is, we can't change anybody's behavior but our own. We never have control over anyone else's behavior. So it's an unrealistic expectation to put on ourselves the responsibility of changing someone else's behavior. When I teach the class that we have here on managing difficult behaviors, I don't talk about behavior modification. If we're modifying behavior, it's our own. I don't talk about behavior modification, I talk about behavior accommodation. Their behavior is going to be what it is. And so we're looking at how to accommodate the behaviors, accommodating the need. We're modifying our own behavior. It's the only behavior we have ever had control over. So I'm passing around this sheet here, which is tips for interacting with a person with dementia. The first one here is reassure, reassure, reassure. You've heard that ad nauseum, I'm sure. But what does that mean? If you're taking notes, I would write down reassure to the emotion, not the words. To the emotion, not the words. So I used to work in an Alzheimer's Day program years ago. I started in the late 80s and all through the 90s working at an Alzheimer's respite program. And we had all kinds of people. There's one gentleman that sticks out in my mind who, you know, the program was from 9 a.m. till 3 in the afternoon. And he would show up about 9 o'clock. And by 9:10, he needed to go home. I got to go home. So we'd be sitting down next to each other, and we would have circle time. So it was an opportunity. We'd go around the circle, and everybody would introduce themselves, and the staff and the volunteers knew about each participant's history and the things they were interested in. And it was actually really lovely kind of reminiscence therapy with each person as we ran around and we knew things about them. It helped to ground them in this knowledge that we were good, familiar people. We knew them. We knew about them. We knew their history. We connected them with familiar, comforting memories about themselves, which helped to, it helped to identify for them that sense of identity that might be elusive for them. So it was lovely for each individual person if it was their turn, but as you're going around the circle, people who couldn't hear what someone else was sharing or people who couldn't focus for that long would sometimes get a little agitated. And so John would say, I gotta get home, I gotta get home. Oh, and then we thought we were reassuring him. We would say, oh, John, everybody's going home at 3 o'clock. Don't worry, we're gonna have lunch. And I think the dogs are coming today. We had therapy dogs who would come and visit, and he liked them. I think the dogs are coming today. We're going to have a nice lunch, and Doris will pick you up at 3 o'clock. No, I got to get home. I've been here all day. I don't even know where Doris is. She's probably off gallivanting with that no good guy again. He'd start getting a little paranoid. And we'd say, John, it's only 9:15. We're going to stay. And we'll have nice lunch. I mean, we just broken record, right? We'll have a nice lunch. And Doris will come at 3 o'clock. We're all going to go home at 3 o'clock. The bus comes at 3 o'clock. We go home at 3 o'clock. It's not 3 o'clock yet. Well, John was demented. He wasn't stupid. He could tell it's 9:15 and 3 o'clock was a whole darn day of his time. And he's got this urgent need right now. So rather than my explanation being helpful, it was gasoline on the fire. What method was I using? Logic and reasoning. Almost never works. No, I got to go right now. I got to go right now. He would be at the door. We'd be playing tug of war. If we had enough staff, we would be walking around the parking lot, wandering with him because he's got to go home. He's got to go home. He's got to go home. And it would just snowball. John, we're going to have a nice lunch. I think it's bratwurst today. I mean, it was not a nice lunch, right? So he would just start escalating. I got to go home. I got to go home. What was the message we were giving John? A, we were using logic and reasoning he couldn't process.
You weren't listening to him.
We weren't listening to him, yeah.
He can't have what he wants.
He can't have what he wants. He's a grown man, and this whippersnapper's telling him what he can and can't do.
You weren't acknowledging his feelings of urgency.
I wasn't acknowledging his feelings of urgency.
You weren't connecting.
I wasn't connecting with him. So we need to reassure, but we need to reassure to the emotion or the need rather than the words.
Did you
Yeah.
ever, what that out.
Yes,
too.
we will. For all of these examples, I'm going to give you the worked out version. So John's telling us he needs to go home. And we're telling him he's going to go home at 3 with his wife Doris after lunch. Da, 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 da. I got to go home. And we're talking about when we go home. When a person has dementia, language becomes really symbolic, metaphoric. And so the words coming out of their mouth aren't necessarily, again, conveying data so much as they're conveying meaning. What does home represent? Safety, security, comfort, familiarity. A place where I can let my guard down, a place where I have some personal power and control, a place where people love me, a place where I can be myself. There's no pressure to perform. He's not saying, take me from this set of 4 walls and bring me to that set of 4 walls. Everything with dementia is in the moment. Right here in this moment, I don't feel at home. I don't have a sense of at-homeness right here in this moment. I don't feel at home in my own skin because my need for safety and security and comfort and familiarity and personal power and control and ability to let my guard down and still feel loved and valued doesn't feel filled right now. Whatever is going on in this moment isn't filling that need. I need to go home. Home is that symbol for feeling at home. Any of you have a loved one who's living in their own home and telling you they want to go home? Anybody gotten to that place? No. That's actually pretty common. I used to do all kinds of home visits, and I remember being inside someone's home. It was a home he built himself and had lived with his wife and raised his children for over 50 years. And he kept packing his suitcase saying he needed to go home now. And his wife was ripping her hair out saying, Harold, you are home. You built this house. No, I got to go home. No, Harold, this is our house. We're in Katati. She would tell him the address. She would show him pictures. I got to go home. I got to go home. In that moment, Harold didn't feel at home. He wasn't saying it over and over from morning till night. He might say it repeatedly throughout the day. But really, it was in this moment when things feel unfamiliar, when I don't know what I'm supposed to do, when things feel unsafe, when I'm really confused. I got to go home. I don't have a sense of at-homeness right now. That's what that means. And if we understand that, then we can speak to the emotions and not the words. So here's what we started doing with John when we finally realized what John needed from us. We'd be sitting. I actually had really good rapport with John. I think I was like 21 at the time. And I think he thought I was his daughter or his granddaughter. He'd call me kid. And so I was with John most of the time. He was sitting down and he went to stand up and say, I got to go home. And I put my hand on his and we had good rapport. Don't touch someone who's agitated if they don't want to be touched. Touch isn't always a good thing. Sometimes it is. This is generally a safe place to touch. I put my hand on his and I said, it's a long day here, isn't it, John? He went, you ain't kidding, kid. And then I said to him, we better stick together, you and me. I'm gonna look out for you, you look out for me. Deal? Deal, kiddo. And I'd say, if I have to hear roll out the barrel one more time on that accordion, I don't know what I'm gonna do, John. And that was the truth. I was getting paid to hear Roll Out the Barrel on the accordion, which was nice and lovely, and it was wonderful that we had musicians who volunteered. I'm not bashing the accordion or Roll Out the Barrel, but when you hear it every single day, it's a little, there's great power in speaking about the elephant in the room. The truth is, how fun is an adult day program for people with dementia? Who wants to be there? How is it a great day if you have to be in a day program for people with dementia because you have dementia? So the big elephant in the room is, it's a long day here. You're enduring quite a bit to be here. I see you, I hear you, I'm on your team. And that should be the message we're conveying all the time. I see you, I hear you, I'm on your team. We figure out whatever words we need to find to convey that message. Because most problematic behavior is seeking to fill those basic needs for safety, security, familiarity, comfort. Now that doesn't mean we have to turn into perfect caregiving robots who never stick our foot in our mouth. I stick my foot in my mouth about 25 times a day. It just means we have a little bit more awareness around how we might be able to help fill a need in that moment so the behavior doesn't have to continue seeking to fill the need. Does that make sense? The perception for the need for the behavior is extinguished in that moment. I'm going to stick with you, John. I'll look out for you, you look out for me. Oh, it's a long day, isn't it? Yeah. I see you, I hear you, I'm on your team. You get to not like this. It makes sense that you don't. I appreciate what you're enduring here. I see it. We'll get through it together. We don't have to love it. We can get through it together not liking it. Rather than Twilight Zone. Isn't it lovely? We're going to have a great lunch. We're going to have Meals on Wheels today. That's crazy. It's crazy. So they're just, a lot of times people with dementia are really just saying the emperor has no clothes. This does stink. My need doesn't feel met in this moment. Now there were other times when John would get up and he would ballroom dance to the music and he would love it and he would be joking and he would be interacting in a lovely, wonderful way that showed he was really enjoying himself and his basic needs felt met. That was the majority of his day in the day program. It was just when those times came up when he needed to go home, we actually made the problem worse when we didn't speak to his need. We kept it exacerbating. We kept the problem going on longer. We made it a bigger problem than it would have been if we just acknowledged it. Does that make sense? We're trying to convince him to not want to go home. We're having two different conversations. Have you ever had a conversation with your loved one who has dementia and you feel like you're having two different conversations? Because you are. Because the words coming out of your mouth mean one thing, and their brain is interpreting something other than what you're saying. And the words coming out of their mouth are dictated by a broken brain that may not be conveying what they mean to say. So we're actually crisscrossing all over the place, even though we think we're talking about the same thing. When we speak to the emotions and not the words, we're much more likely to connect. There's more opportunity for actual communication of meaning when we speak to the emotions and not the words. The next one, try to remain calm. If I was writing this list, I would write, try to convey calm. Try to present some calmness. I don't know that remaining calm is really realistic. I got support there. So try to convey calm. That doesn't mean bottle up your emotions and stuff them away somewhere. Nobody wins if you do that. It just means be aware of that principle number 2, that our thoughts, attitudes, and actions significantly impact on the behavior of the person with dementia. And if we start getting upset and showing signs of agitation ourselves, they're going to sniff that out and pick it up at this instinctive level in no time, because that helps them get through the day. This is about survival. And so if the person that I look to for my cues is agitated or anxious or acting upset, what's the message?
Something's wrong.
Something's wrong. Ah, we better get our guard up. We better get into protection mode. Something's wrong. I'm picking up my cues from you. So when we convey cool, calm, collectedness, we're less likely to introduce their need for them to become self-protective. Does that make sense? So we find when we convey calm, cool, calm, collectedness, we're less likely to introduce to them that something is wrong. They don't need to become self-protective, because the person I look to for my cue is cool. So everything's cool. It's like me on an airplane. I always look at the flight attendants. I'm not a good flyer. So if there's turbulence and the flight attendant is still handing out drinks and seeming pleasant, then I can continue with my deep breathing. If the flight attendant straps in, it's going to take more than deep breathing for me. Something's wrong. I'm picking up my cues from them. So this isn't about stuffing your emotions. It's about being aware of what energy you're bringing into the interaction as a thoughtful intervention. And you're finding other appropriate outlets for your frustration and your grief and your anger and your exhaustion. Support groups, classes, counseling, talking with your friends, or my favorite, smashing plates. How many of you heard me share that story? I had a client once who was 85 years old. She was taking care of her husband with dementia. She cared for him 24/7 except for 4 hours a week when she had a caregiver. And I actually had a student intern with me. We drove up, and they lived pretty rurally. We drove up to their house, and we were doing this assessment of her needs. And she was talking about how, you know, what she does when she has her respite. She goes out and she does all her errands, but she always saves 20 minutes at the end to stop by the Goodwill so she can buy some old plates. And we say, oh, what do you use your plates for? Well, you know, on those days when I can't get out, if Harold's just driving me nuts, I go out on the patio and I lay out some plastic, and I take my plates and I smash them. And I thought, brilliant. Now my student intern looked at me like, what are you going to do about this? I thought it was brilliant. For her, she was able to get her aggression out. She goes, sometimes I smash 10 plates, sometimes I smash 15 plates, and then I come in and I can breathe a little more easily. Nobody gets hurt. She's not smashing Harold. She's not leaving. She's getting her aggression out that way. So support groups, classes, counseling, time with friends, whatever it is for you that helps you get your baseline a little farther away from your breaking point, even if that's smashing plates on your patio. I don't care what it is. If you're not hurting someone or someone else or breaking the law, if it helps you to get your baseline a little farther away from your breaking point, you will be more likely able to convey calm when you're interacting with your loved one. It's going to be really hard for you to have the presence of mind to collect yourself before you knee-jerk yourself. It's going to take, you're not going to have the energy it takes to do it, even if you do remember you're not supposed to. Then you're going to feel really guilty that you didn't do it the right way. Then if you're like most people, you're going to start feeling resentful, because why should you have to feel guilty when you're bending over backwards? And it just turns into this vicious cycle. So, you know, we always harp about self-care. We're talking about figuring out ways to get your baseline a little farther away from your breaking point. If this is your breaking point and you're right up against it, it only takes that much stress for you to break. If you can get yourself even to here, the same amount of stress doesn't cause you to break. It sure bumps you up. You'll feel it, but you've got a little more margin to tolerate it. Does that make sense? So try to convey calm. You're more likely able to do that if you're also doing some of these other things. One way to get yourself away from your from your breaking point is that context, those realistic expectations. We really ratchet ourselves up when we get into our own head and think we have to fix all of this. That's a really tall, unrealistic order. So the more realistic we are, the more margin we have also. The next one here, do not disagree with made-up stories. This is kind of based in principle number 4, to remain connected regardless of the content of the conversation. So if your wife tells you that she had such a lovely time with you when you went dancing last night, and you didn't go dancing last night, might be okay to say, yeah, wasn't that fun? We always have a good time. That's a piece of cake. But if your wife tells you that she thinks you're having an affair, what are you doing gallivanting around and leaving me here? I know you're having an affair. I know you're cheating on me. How are you supposed to not disagree with that made-up story? It's a little harder to do. So we fall back on the other principles we've talked about, right? We speak to emotions rather than words. What does it feel like? Some of you may have had this experience before. Some of you can probably imagine what it might feel like if your significant other was cheating on you. Feel betrayed. What else?
Angry.
Angry.
Insecure.
Insecure. Hurt. I think insecure is a big one. And a lot of the anger and betrayal and all of that, we often hear people wondering, what did I do to deserve this? Why don't they love me and value me? What's wrong with me? So often when people are having those kinds of, or exhibiting those kinds of accusations, and that's a pretty common one actually, when the primary caregiver is a intimate partner. So the feeling might be a need to feel loved and valued, a need for a sense of value and worth. Doesn't mean they feel that way because you didn't do enough. They feel that way because this disease is taking the bottom out and the need never stays filled. Those things that I do in my daily tasks that ordinarily would inform my sense of identity and self-confidence and value and worth, I'm not remembering. So those needs aren't staying filled. I don't feel valuable. I don't feel a sense of worth because I'm not getting that message that I am through my daily tasks that inform those needs. So when I feel vulnerable or I feel like I'm not valuable, it feels the way I would feel if my spouse were cheating on me. Therefore, they must be cheating on me because it feels that way. And if I feel it, it's so. There's none of this going on. If I feel it, it is so. So we can speak to the emotions rather than the words. Boy, you know, I just really love you. I'm so glad to be here with you right now. I'm so glad we have this time together. And start talking about how much you value them and how much they're worth to you. Doesn't mean they won't have those flares again when the need doesn't stay satiated. Just means in that moment, you're not contributing to it getting worse. Does that make sense? I had somebody in one of these classes one time raise their hand and say they were caring for a mother who had dementia, who kept accusing their late father of having had an affair. And she didn't bring it up till after he died. She didn't even remember he had died. And she kept accusing him of having an affair to their daughters, their adult daughters. And they were having a really hard time with it because they adored their father. They didn't believe that it was true. They thought mom was delusional. And they were getting upset with her for telling everybody all this stuff about their father. So they were starting to feel protective of dad and getting really upset with mom and not knowing how to respond to that. And my suggestion, the thing that I kind of fall back on when somebody's bringing up an uncomfortable topic, is to say, gosh, I'm so sorry that happened. I hope that never happens to anyone ever again. And then move on. And they weren't comfortable with that. They said, nah, I can't do that because it didn't happen. They felt like they'd be betraying themselves and their father if they did that. So we worked on the wording a little bit until they got to a place where they were comfortable with a response. So what if you say, gee, I'm so sorry to hear that, Mom. I hope that never happens to anyone ever again. I said, aren't you sorry to hear it? Aren't you so sorry to hear it you hope you never hear it again? Aren't you so sorry to hear it you might throw up if you have to hear it again? Aren't you sick of hearing it you're so sorry to hear it? And they said, yeah, we are. And they could live with that. They were sorry to hear it. That's not a lie. They do hope nobody has to have this experience that their mom's having right now ever again. Not a lie. I see you, I hear you, I'm on your team. And they didn't have to feel like they were betraying themselves or their father. That's helpful when people are having historic memories. I used that a lot when I was working with people who had been in wars. You know, rather than saying, gee, what was the name of the ship that your brother was on? Oh my gosh, you know, and help. We're not processing and keeping people's brains on the topic. The goal again is to help them know, I see you, I hear you, I get it. We're speaking to the content. We're not disagreeing with the story. It might be made up, might not be. Doesn't really matter. It's more an expression of my experience. I feel like this happened. And we're speaking to those feelings. Gosh, I'm so sorry to hear that.
Most important.
I'm so sorry to hear that. I hope that never happens to anyone ever again. Even if someone has aphasia, I was in, some of you have heard me share this story before. I was in the house of somebody who was caring for their husband who had a pretty massive stroke and had dementia as a result. And he was actually laying in a hospital bed in their living room. And she had gotten up to go do something, and he kept trying to tell me something. I was sitting next to his bed, and he had what we call word salad, which is exactly what it sounds like, a bunch of words tossed up together in a bowl like you would toss up salad. He kept saying to me, the ceiling's under my armpit. And so my first thought was, well, he's laying in this bed, he's looking up at the ceiling. Is there something on the ceiling? And then I thought, well, he's got all these tubes. Could something be caught in his armpit? So, you know, I'm a social worker. I'm trained to go to the most obvious thing first before I assign meaning that might be inaccurate. Nothing under his armpit, nothing on the ceiling. Ceiling's under my armpit. I'm sorry, I don't know. The ceiling's under my armpit. The ceiling's under my armpit. And I'm trying, and I finally put my hand on his arm and I said, I'm so sorry. This must be so frustrating. And he said, and we moved on. So we can't always come to a solution. It's about acknowledging, like you said, I see you, I hear you, I get this. I get this is so frustrating for you. I get that you believe it. The message, and never say these words because it will feel so, I would feel so patronized if someone said it to me. It will feel patronizing. But the message should be, I believe that you believe it. I believe that you believe it. Most of us can wrap our brain around that. We understand they have a neurocognitive impairment that's affecting their brain and the way they perceive things, the way they express themselves. We believe they believe it. Most people on the planet who are reasonable and clear thinking don't expect other people to solve all their problems for them. Most reasonable, clear thinking people want to be seen and heard and cared about. And we can do that with people who have dementia by speaking to their emotions and not disagreeing with the made-up story. The made-up story is their expression of their experience. Does that make sense? Really easy to do if it's a lovely content, much more tricky if the content is tricky. So there's always connection available. Sometimes we have to connect in those raw places. We can connect around both of us being frustrated right now. But you know what? If I validate how frustrating this is for him, rather than trying to put on rose-colored glasses and try to make the best of it, when there's no best of it for him, he has an ally in the world. He's no longer alienated. There's somebody else on the planet who shares his experience right now in this moment. And when the rubber meets the road, that's what we all need. So much of this is just good communication.
There is no judgment.
Right. Right. Now, we're not robots, we're human beings, and we have histories with the people that we're providing care for. So my goal isn't that you're never going to get muddy. Some of you have heard me say this before because I say it all the time. I think a realistic goal is that we make a U-turn when we realize we're waist deep in the mud versus up to our eyeballs in the mud. I don't think there's a way to not step into the mud. As soon as we recognize that what we're doing isn't helpful, give ourselves permission to try something else. We'll be better able to give ourselves that permission when we are following these principles and tips because we'll have accurate context. It's no longer disrespectful for me to go along with their story or not help them understand differently. It's more respectful and accommodating of their new need. Does that make sense? So the context determines really everything. So there might be times when we feel that judgment because we're human. We might be waist deep. That's an indication, boy, I'm getting really close to my breaking point. I need to do something to help me have a little bit more margin so I can tolerate this a little bit better. Is that helpful? The next one here, give compliments. Often we know from research with people in early stages that when people have neurocognitive impairment, their sense of themselves, their self-worth, self-esteem is diminished. They report that to us when they're still able to report that. And it makes sense when we live in a culture that tells us that our value is determined by our contribution. Right? When was the last time you went to a party and someone said, "Hi, I'm Alexis. Who are you?" "Oh, hi, I'm Cindy." "Hi, Cindy, nice to meet you. So what makes your soul happy? What makes your heart sing?" Nobody does that. What do they ask? "Hi, what do you do? What do you do?" Our value is so wrapped up in our contribution. And when we can't contribute in the ways that we were once able to contribute, it makes sense that we start wondering about our worth. So giving compliments often is huge. It sounds really trite. It's not. It's huge. I see you, I hear you, I value you. Easy to do if they're doing something lovely. Easy to do in those moments where they're humorous. You mentioned maintaining a sense of humor. Really tough to do if they're walking around taking stuff and putting it in their pockets and you just set the table and they're rearranging or they're putting laundry in the dishwasher. I had somebody in class say, "But what if you can't think about what to compliment on because they're just, it's so difficult?" And I loved that they felt safe enough to ask that question.
The Cascade will do a great job on
Yeah,
on
on
the
the
shorts.
shorts. So he said the Cascade will do a great job on the shorts. So we speak to the intention behind the behavior. If somebody's walking around taking stuff, I did an in-service once for a residential care facility, and they were introducing me to someone, and they said, "Hi, this is Dorothy. She's our resident thief." And I was like, but she was that person, you know. There were forks in her purse. Everybody's pen was in her pocket. She had stuff squirreled away in her room. What's the need behind that behavior?
Attention.
I don't know so much about attention, because she was getting pretty negative attention from that, and I don't think she was remembering it. With a kid, that might be the case, because they're remembering and it's getting reinforced. Yeah, Leon.
Well, it was the lady that asked the priest that when she died, besides her catechism, she wanted a fork in her hand. Everybody knows the story?
No.
When you ask, well, why did she want a fork in her hand? It was because whenever she went out and they were picking up the dinner plates, they'd say, "Save your fork, the best is yet."
Aww.
Could it
That's
also
sweet.
be a sense of ownership?
Could be a sense of ownership. I think more so though, it's a need for purposeful behavior. I'm helping. I see that these things look valuable, so I'm going to keep them safe. When people squirrel stuff away, they're keeping it safe. So sometimes it can be a sense of ownership. You know, this is my stuff that is valuable to me and I want to keep it safe. But when they're taking everybody else's stuff, I think it's more an attempt to be helpful, an attempt to be purposeful. I'm going to take this valuable stuff and squirrel it away so it's safe. So when people are doing things that are difficult, it's sometimes hard to think about how we might complement that. When I've had people doing that, I remember setting the table at the day program and other people coming along and rearranging it or taking the stuff off. And I would turn around and I'd say, "Oh, thank you, Dorothy. I'm so glad you're here today to help me." "Oh, thank you so much." And it helps meet that need. Oh, somebody sees me and hears me and values me. Rather than, no, forks stay here. We're going to have meatloaf. We need our forks. Logic, logic, logic. And then they don't feel seen and heard or valued, so they get their guard up. They perceive the need to be self-protective. So what about someone who comes out with their bra on the outside of their shirt and lipstick all over their face, like what's become of Baby Jane? Our initial response is to say, "Oh my goodness, come here, let me fix that for you, let me help you." Because our sense of who our loved one is wrapped up in how they present. So it brings up a lot of grief for us to see someone who ordinarily would have been very fastidious about their appearance coming out looking so disheveled. "Oh, your lipstick's smudged. Let me fix it for you." Which kind of automatically puts them on guard, makes them feel judged, makes them embarrassed, makes them ashamed. We're drawing attention to the mistake. If someone has a bra on the outside of the shirt, what does that tell us?
Depends upon who he is.
What does that tell us about her?
Confusion.
She's confused, but she bothered to put on a bra.
She's going out.
She wants to be put together. She got the order mixed up,
But she looks snazzy today.
but she's trying to be put together. Something's important. If she has lipstick on, why would she bother to put on lipstick? Why do women put on lipstick?
Going out, right?
To look
To look pretty. So rather than, oh my goodness, you smudged, let me fix that for you. Come on, before anyone sees. I might walk up and say, oh, Marjorie, you look lovely today. Because her intent was to look lovely. And if she's none the wiser, it's not her problem. It's my problem. And I'm not minimizing the caregiver's problem. The grief around seeing your loved one who used to be fastidious be this confused is profound. It is profound and it's yours. It's not theirs. So if we want to have connection, we got to get support for our profound grief. And in the moment, remain connected with our loved one who's attempting to look lovely and put together. So we can complement the intent behind the behavior if the behavior is challenging for us. There's always a way to find a complement. If we're thinking about the need behind the behavior, we speak to that need. Does that make sense? Respond to the person's feelings, not the words. I'm beating this to death on purpose. Why do we respond to their feelings and not their words?
The only way you're gonna communicate.
Yeah, it's the only way we can communicate. Because their words are dictated by a broken brain and may or may not mean what we think they mean. Their feelings are always accurate. And based on their perceptions, which might be different from our perceptions, so it can be challenging for us, but always accurate for them. Feelings are never logical for anybody. So if we speak to their feelings and not their words, we're more likely to maintain connection. Yes?
I'm just having a problem with that emotions aren't also linked to cognitive function.
They inform one another,
Yeah.
but by themselves, in a vacuum, emotions are not logical.
No, I
Yeah. Our thoughts
triggered by
are,
thoughts.
yes, and then we test them against reality and decide whether or not to hang on to them.
So if our reality's twisted,
They're always
They look
based on
right.
our perception. That's right. So sometimes if we change our perception, we change our thought, our emotions will follow. A person with dementia is not capable of that kind of cognitive therapy, which is really what you're doing there. When our thoughts do inform our emotions can sometimes trigger thoughts. But if we're clear thinking, we can evaluate the realistic nature of those thoughts. And when we shift the thought, the emotion follows. That process is too complicated for a person with dementia. Their feeling is their reality. This isn't happening. It's just this, like that newborn baby. Does that make sense? So we speak to the feelings, not the words, because that's where the connection is available. As soon as we start using logic and reasoning, as soon as we start speaking to words, we're setting ourselves up. As soon as we're speaking to words, we're entering into Logicville. So I'm going to use, does anyone need me to repeat that? First connect, then distract. I'm going to use an example from when I was working in the day program. We had a woman who would constantly think that people were stealing her purse. So we would go, and we would go from one room to the next to have lunch, or we'd come into the activities room, or we'd go out to take a walk, and she's always yelling. And she didn't have a filter anymore, so she would curse like a sailor. And it was always around the purse. Somebody stole my purse. Somebody stole my purse. I'm never coming back here again. You're all a bunch of lousy thieves. And when we would go for walks outside, it was the worst. And, our intent for a walk outside was to have some lovely time listening to the birds, looking at the flowers, just having a change of scenery. Well, she's ranting and raving. Why do you think that is?
It's not comfortable.
Because when do we reach for our purses? when we step up to leave a room, or when we, we keep our purse next to us. So we made a transition and our purse wasn't there. So we eventually thought, okay, well, we'll have her husband stop bringing her purse because she keeps misplacing it and she's thinking people are stealing it. So out of sight, out of mind. That was worth a try. I'm from the school of whatever works. It was worth a try. It didn't work. Because even when her husband kept the purse at home, she would still think someone stole her purse. And she, in her own mind, had evidence, because where is it? Somebody must have taken it. So then we would try to reassure her. Oh no, Mary, your purse is at home. We had your husband keep it at home so it would be nice and safe. And when you go home, your purse will be there. I know somebody took my purse. You're all a bunch of lying thieves. I'm never coming back to this place again. She was just incensed. So then we tried distractions. So we're out walking around and Mary is ranting and raving about her purse. Somebody stole my purse, somebody stole my purse. And the nurse runs up to her, thinking in her head, I'm going to distract her. Somebody stole my purse, you're all a bunch of lousy thieves. And the nurse runs up and says, Mary, look at the roses. And Mary turns around and says, I don't want to look at any GD roses. Somebody stole my purse. And the nurse was at a loss. I thought I was supposed to distract her. Distractions don't work with Mary, I guess. She didn't connect first. Mary, again, has dementia. She's demented. She's not stupid. I'm telling you someone stole my purse, and you're saying, look, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman? How insulting. The message, I see you, I hear you, I'm on your team, was not conveyed. What does purse represent? For men, it's often keys or wallet.
Power.
Power. What else?
Freedom.
Freedom.
Possession.
Possession.
Identity.
Identity. Absolutely. My ID is in my purse. We call our driver's license our ID. What else?
Security.
Security. Independence. Anybody ever had their purse or their wallet stolen? I have. Back before cell phones, so I had my address book in there. I had my keys, I had my wallet, I had a little bit of money, I was a student. I had my favorite lipstick. I had my, just my things that I call upon to make me feel like myself and make me feel secure. All that stuff was in there.
It feels like a violation.
Absolutely, a violation. Absolutely. I was more upset that somebody knew my address and the color of my eyes and how much I weighed, for God's sake, than I was about the money. I could cancel the credit cards. But there was this sense of violation and this unease that somebody had my information, my connection to the rest of the world, my address book, my calendar, all that stuff's in our cell phones now, but still usually in our purse, if we have a purse. So if somebody stole my purse and went through it, they would know a whole heck of a lot about me. My identity is in there. It was violating. Mary's telling us, I feel as if someone stole my purse. I feel as threatened, as violated, as if my purse had just been stolen. And you're telling me smell the roses? So we have to first connect and then distract. Remember, the goal is distraction, so we're not going to connect forever because that defeats the purpose. Connection is brief and then distract. So, all this we kind of worked on. Next time we're out, she's doing her thing. You stole my purse, you stole my purse. You're all a bunch of lousy thieves. I'm never coming back here again. And I said to Mary, oh my gosh, Mary, what's the matter? Somebody stole my purse. I'm never coming back here again. Oh, I can't believe that. I'm so sorry to hear that. I've had my purse stolen before too. It's an awful feeling. Can I help you look for it? Sometimes they, you know, Mary lost a purse. If anyone sees a purse, it's Mary's. I believe you. I believe you. I want to help you. I'm showing helpfulness rather than talking about helpy kinds of things. She's experiencing me as helpful rather than hearing all kinds of words that I think sound great. And my goal is to get her brain off of the purse. So I've connected with a few sentences, and now I'm just going to be quiet. She's not screaming anymore. So now we're walking together quietly, and I walk her by the rose bush, and I say, oh, Mary, look at those roses. Aren't they beautiful? Smell this one. Do you have a garden? And now we're talking about gardening. That doesn't mean 10 more times that day she doesn't think somebody stole her purse. My goal is not to stop it from starting. I don't have control over that. My goal is simply not to add fuel to the fire. When it starts, I'm going to assign accurate meaning in the context. I'm going to speak to her emotions. I'm going to try to convey calm. I see you. I hear you. I'm on your team. So if it happens 10 more times that day, that doesn't mean I was unsuccessful because she kept doing it. It means she forgot the need was met in that moment, and in this moment the need came up again. Does that make sense? I feel as violated and as threatened as if someone stole my purse because this disease is robbing me of all of those things that my purse represents. She really is being robbed of all those things. She can't articulate that. She doesn't understand it's the disease. Her feeling is accurate. The meaning she assigns to the feeling, the conclusion she draws about why she has the feeling is inaccurate. But the feeling is accurate. This disease is violating her and insulting her and robbing her of all of those things that a purse represents. When we understand that, we don't have to be triggered to be so guarded. Because the words are symbols for their feelings. Does that make sense? Do not try to reason with the person. Another one I just throw in there for fun, right? Why? Because there's no reason, right? By definition, by the definition that I gave for that umbrella term, dementia includes impaired logic and reasoning. Give yourself permission to alter the truth. Some of us have already talked about this. There's this concept that industry term is used as therapeutic fib or therapeutic lying. And I kind of take issue with that term. A, because I think since we're this big, we're taught lying is disrespectful, and it usually is. Honesty at all costs is respectful and nothing less. But reality is a little different when we're perceiving differently, right?
So you use little white lies?
We just kind of, but I think it's more accurate to call this disease-appropriate language in the same way that we use child-appropriate language for young children whose brains aren't fully developed. We want to use disease-appropriate language for people with dementia whose brains are undeveloping.
So, how far do you take that? I mean, you know, I could, for my mom, I could probably tell her that we talked about something, or we agreed on something, or, you know, that we made this plan and, you know, we discussed it, and she might not remember.
Right.
She won't tell me she doesn't remember, because
No, she didn't remember.
Know that I mean, whatever. I mean, I don't know why. She just, if I say, remember we da-da-da-da-da, she'll say, oh, yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And I assign to that, you know, she doesn't really remember that, but she doesn't want to admit.
So these are for when what you're doing isn't working. If she says, oh yeah, and it's working and it's not a problem, you don't have to employ any alternate strategies. So let me use my example because I'm aware, I'm happy to stay after, I'm aware of the time and I want to make sure we get all of these in. So giving yourself permission to alter the truth, we want to follow their lead. I assign meaning always in the context of the disease. I think it's much less likely that they're aware and covering up and don't want to tell us because they don't want to out themselves. That's a lot of calculation.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as I
It's more lack of insight. If they actually have this diagnosis, they really think they remembered. Sure, that's also just rote language. We're bantering, we're having a conversation. I know how to be conversational. Oh, sure, yeah, oh, cool, yeah. Doesn't mean she's keyed into even the topic of the conversation. She's just sounding conversational because that's her survivalistic way to ingratiate herself in the herd and not get eaten. Really, really. So it's, you know, she's just sounding right. She's presenting well. So will someone do, so we're going to follow their lead, and we're going to just kind of keep it pretty simple. So is there somebody who wouldn't mind being, would you mind just, you can sit right there, you don't have to stand up, you know, but would you mind doing a role play with me?
Sure.
You be the person with dementia.
Oh, great.
And I'll be the caregiver. You tell me my mother's the queen.
Oh,
So
but you know your mother's the queen.
No, you're telling me your mother's the queen.
My mother's the queen?
Mhm.
Oh, my mother is the queen.
Well, actually, Barbara, I read on your card that your mother was a seamstress. She used to sew clothes for all the kids in the neighborhood. So she couldn't have been a queen because you grew up in Detroit. And but she was a seamstress?
No, she's the queen.
Well, was she born in England? You know, in Detroit, you grew up in Detroit, and she used to sew, and, you know, she was a seamstress. Not, you know, we don't have a
No,
queen in the
she had
United
servants.
States.
Servants sew for her.
We don't have a queen in the United States. We have a president, and your mother was a seamstress, and you grew up in Detroit?
Perhaps.
Oh, you're so lovely. Her face, if you could see her face, she's looking at me like, lady, I don't know who you are, but I mean, she's kind of moving away from me a little bit. Now, after that interchange, if I said, come on, it's time to eat lunch, would you like to come eat with me? Or
No, I
would you
don't
like
know
me
who
to
you are.
help you in the bathroom?
You're annoying.
Plus, I lie about her mother, right?
You must
I'm
be
a liar.
talking about some other mother.
So logic and reasoning and truth often sounds like a lie when we're contradicting what they believe to be true. She thinks I'm lying about her mom. I've had people get really angry with, like, really angry. You knew this was pretend, and how did you feel as we were doing this?
Like you must have been talking to somebody else, not
Yeah,
even me.
this was confusing. We weren't connecting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I lost you there.
So let's try it again. You tell me my mother's the queen.
Oh, my mother's the queen. I'm the demented person
yes,
again?
yes. Remember? So you tell me my mother's the queen.
This is my first time acting.
I appreciate it.
My mother is the queen.
You know, I always knew there was something special about you. You know, if your mother's the queen, that makes you a princess.
Oh, that's definitely true.
Boy, it's my lucky day. I'm seated by royalty. You know, I think it's lunchtime. Would you like to come eat with me?
Oh, that would be great.
Or I'm going to the ladies' room. Would you like to come with me? Because I see you for who you are, this important person, right? Thank you, thank you. So, again, I'm following her lead. I'm not dragging it out super crazy. I'm meeting the need. I'm speaking to the need. If my mother's the queen, that means there's something significant about me.
Can I say something?
Mm-hmm.
My mother, I just gave her a boy, when she's hungry, she was like
Ah.
that. She's hungry now.
Aw. So my mother is the queen. There's something important about me. Now, I'm following her lead. If I said, oh, that means you're royalty, she could have said, no, you don't get it. She's a tyrant. Then I'd have gone, oh, one of those queens. And I would have just, she's zigging and I'm zigging with her. It's like we're dancing and they're the lead. We had somebody who was new in our program, and we had talked about this concept of allowing ourselves to alter the truth. And, you know, it was the end of her first day, and everyone had gone home, and she said, you know, I know you guys said it was okay to use the therapeutic fib, but I don't think it works with Dorothy. We said, why? What happened? And she said, well, at lunch today, she kept saying, my parents are looking for me. My parents are looking for me. And we said, yeah, so what did you say? Well, I told her, I know, I saw them in the hallway.
Oh, no.
And we had that response, and we said, so what did she say? Well, she slammed her fist down, and she said, no, you didn't, they're dead. So I don't know, and we laughed. Again, she was speaking to the words and not the emotions. If my parents are looking for me, what does that mean about me? I'm lost. I feel as if I'm a little child whose parents must be looking for her. I feel lost. This wasn't even about her parents. She knew her parents were dead. This was about her feeling lost. I feel as if my parents ought to be looking for me. In my mind, I preface what a person with dementia tells me with this prefix. I feel as if. I feel as if my parents are looking for me. I feel as if you stole my purse. I feel as if you're having an affair. I feel as if someone's breaking into my house. I feel as if I need to go home. And if I, in my mind, put that in front of every sentence, then that sets me up to be keyed into the emotion rather than the words. I feel as if, well, what does that feel like? I feel lost. So what she could have done to alter that, rather than reorienting her and saying, well, your parents couldn't be looking for you because they're probably dead because you're 93, that's not going to be helpful. She could have said, oh, they are. What's your mother's name? What's your father's name? I'll stay here with you and make sure you're safe until they show up. And then start some reminiscence talking about parents. Because when we put people in touch with lovely, familiar memories, we evoke familiarity. Memories evoke emotion. If you close your eyes right now and think about the happiest thing that ever happened to you, you will feel happy. And if you close your eyes right now and think about the saddest thing that ever happened to you, you will feel sad. So if we can put people in touch with safe, comforting, familiar memories, we can often evoke feelings of safety and comfort and familiarity in that moment. So we can maybe start talking about parents. Avoid asking questions that rely on short-term memory. People with dementia aren't storing their short-term memory into long-term memory. So they might be able to tell you who their first grade teacher was, but they might not be able to tell you what they had for breakfast this morning. The structure in their brain that acts as the save button, that saves short-term memory onto the hard drive as long-term memory, isn't working anymore. And so if we ask someone to remember that conversation we had last week, or remember what the doctor told them yesterday, or remember that they can't drive anymore, we're setting ourselves up. Now, sometimes the synapses fire and they can remember certain things and they can't remember other things. Sometimes they remember some of it and not all of the details, so we might misinterpret that as them having selective memory. But the truth is the memories didn't get stored accurately. The other thing is sometimes people remember only what you wish they would forget and they can't remember anything else that you wish they would remember. And that's usually because they have implicit memory or emotional memory, their emotional experience of a person or a place or a situation. When I used to walk into the day program, people would say, oh, there she is. And if you asked, who is that? Nobody would say, that's Alexis, the girl who works here and helps us. I was that girl, I was their daughter, I was their granddaughter, I was the teacher. They didn't know who I was or how they knew me. They just knew when I was in the room, they saved face and it felt good. There she is. When the nurse walked into the room, my hand to God, they would say, she's a bad one. I'm not going with her. When it was music time, nobody wanted to dance with the nurse. And if you said, who was that? They wouldn't say, that's Jean the nurse who makes us do things we don't want to do. They don't know who she was or how they knew her either, but they had an implicit emotional memory. When her face was in the room, they didn't save face, and it didn't feel good. So sometimes what people hold on to and what they don't hold on to can be a little bit confusing for us, and we sometimes assign meaning that's inaccurate. Well, if you can remember that, why can't you remember that? You just don't want to remember that. And we get stuck in history with them. But the truth is, for the most part, shorter-term memories are going to be more problematic than longer-term memories. So if our goal is connection, we might want to start a conversation that's more reminiscent. Tell me about that time when you lived in Santa Cruz. Tell me about your father and, you know, his dogs that he used to have. You know, just longer term things that get people in touch with those more familiar, accessible emotions and evoke familiarity and safety and security. Please don't reminisce about some traumatic memory. That's not fair to them, and it won't be helpful for you. But if your goal is connection, and you have a connection about something that's lovely and reminiscent, A, they're more likely to accurately remember most of it, and B, you're going to start evoking those familiar, safe memories. Now, if they don't accurately remember every detail and our goal is connection, we're going to let that slide. It's going to pain us. It's going to grieve us that they don't remember accurately, and we're going to take that to our support group or to our patio and break some plates about it. We're not going to stuff that grief. We're going to express it and get support, but in a more constructive place. We're going to compartmentalize it while we're in connection with them. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. Tasks into simple steps. This sounds pretty common sense. I taught a class one time and we went through all the steps involved in brushing teeth, and we got to about 30 something before we stopped, and we could have kept going. We take for granted all of the autopilot, minute steps within steps. It's not just go to the back, you know, put the toothpaste on the toothbrush, brush, rinse and spit. First, you have to find where the toothpaste and the toothbrush are. You got to know how to get them out of the cabinet. You got to open the door, take it out, take the lid off, put the lid down, pick up the toothbrush, squirt it on, put this down, turn on the water, put this under, go on and on and on. And we take all of those simple steps for granted. When a person has dementia, sometimes they're forgetful of those sequencing, of the sequences involved in tasks. So if we want to help someone be able to complete a task or be a little more independent, we have to prompt at that minute level. Sometimes we have time for that, and sometimes it's faster if we put the toothpaste on the toothbrush and hand it to them. I don't think there's an ethical dilemma there. I think if we do what's more practical for everybody involved, everybody wins. Respond calmly to anger, don't contradict. You know, and sometimes we're not contradicting to be contrary, we're just contradicting because we think we're helping someone understand better. Especially when someone's angry, contradiction is just going to make them feel more alienated. Anger is always the response to vulnerability or powerlessness. When I feel powerless, instinctively, anger makes me powerful. I'm not deciding to become angry. I'm perceiving powerlessness or vulnerability, and I'm springing into anger as self-protection. So when someone's angry, and we remember that, we can ask ourselves, how might power have been taken away from them in this moment? How might they be perceiving that power was taken away from them in this moment? And we can speak to that need. If someone's really escalating and escalating and escalating, sometimes the best thing to do is to not do anything. Research shows that it takes the human body 15 to 20 minutes to come back to baseline after having been angry. Not after starting, after having been. Then our body has to kind of clean out all those stress hormones. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes. Our best advice, if you're thinking that things are going to escalate and it might become dangerous, is to call 911. I've had fighters in this room say, we don't mind. If you call 911 and when someone's wandering out the door or someone's fallen or you're getting, things are escalating verbally and you're afraid it might get physical, always better to call for help before it does. Most of the time, if we can step back, stop contributing fuel on the fire, give that time to calm down, and then re-enter the situation on a different topic, not revisiting the previous topic, a different topic that involves ice cream or something pleasurable and lovely. Most of the time, we don't get to the place where we have to call 911, but don't take that out of your bag of tricks. If it gets to the place where you feel like there are diminishing returns and things are going to escalate, please call 911. I'm going to show some video clips and we might go over just a little bit. If you have to leave right at 4 o'clock, please feel free to do so quietly. I just want to show some clips actually of examples of some of these tips being used. So this is a person, John Coons, who's out of University of Wisconsin. He actually does the reminiscence therapy. I love him. I followed him around and listened to him speak years and years ago when I was doing my master's thesis. He's actually interviewing people with dementia using some of these strategies. And bear with me while I skip to the little vignettes that I want us to see. As you're watching, just kind of look at the lists and see if you notice any of the strategies. So much harder to skip on a DVD than with a...
It is important to maximize use of gracious, polite social interaction.
Well, I don't know because I haven't been seeing her. I've been away.
Yeah. Well, now that you're back, she'll stop by.
Where's she?
Is everybody here?
It wouldn't be you.
She always does.
Come on now. I was born there a few years ago.
Where were you born?
Ladysmith, Wisconsin.
Oh, I'm from Wisconsin also.
Oh, are you?
Mm-hmm. A little north of Ladysmith.
Oh.
Between Ladysmith and here.
Oh. Oh, sure. Yeah, my name is... oh, I can't think. But my husband was pretty well known around. Not my husband, but my dad. But I was just a little.
Now, did you live in Ladysmith a lot of your life?
Well, no, until I was grown up. And then we came up to Duluth.
I
My
see.
parents did.
So your growing up years, you were in Ladysmith.
Yeah.
And what did you and your twin sister do?
We didn't do anything. We were too small.
Well, I bet you went to school.
Oh, yeah, for a few years. Esther and Alice.
Esther and Alice, both twins.
Yeah,
And you're Alice.
yeah.
Did you ever go, I don't know, in the winter, did you go sliding?
Oh, sure.
Play in the
Ladysmith?
snow? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
And did you ever go to any dances when you were getting a little older?
Yes. Yeah. Uh-huh. We tried at least.
You tried? Mm-hmm. Did some boys ask you to dance?
Oh,
I bet.
of course.
Of course.
They still do.
Alice's stages seem to vary with the minute. It appears sometimes she understands a little bit more than other times. Her moods can switch very quickly from minute to minute. Sometimes she's definitely more alert than other times and appears to understand more what you're saying. Alice's repetitive themes normally include her twin sister who's been gone for about 70 years. It also includes her husband who's been gone for years, and her other brothers and sisters.
So sometimes I show this and people say, yeah, well, try that with my mom. This lady's a cupcake. And what I like to remind people is that they said her moods tend to vary with the minute. That sometimes she remembers more, sometimes she remembers less. But all we see of Alice in this snapshot is her response to the techniques they're employing. What we came in a little bit late on this, the first question she asks is, "Where's Esther? She should be coming soon." And the lady says, "Oh, you know how she is. She comes and goes." Now, Esther's been dead for over 70 years. How would this have been different from the get-go if they had said, "What do you mean, where's Esther? Don't you remember the accident?" Esther died, and Esther has been buried in the cemetery in Duluth, and sometimes when we fly back, we visit her, but you know, remember she had an accident and she died. How would this connection have been different? Lots different, yeah. She might have, you said she'd have to grieve it all over again. So sometimes I think it's like having them have that shock and awe of hearing it for the first time over and over again when we remind people that a relative who's passed away has died. Or she might not believe us and now we're lying. Where's Esther? So the outcome might have been 180 degrees in the opposite direction, just like it was in this interaction with my mother's the queen, right? The outcome there was 180 degrees different based on my behavior, not based on her behavior. Alice gets to be confused because she has a disease that makes her confused. And when we accommodate that and we meet with her, then I think a baby was born. That's what that is. When we accommodate her and she feels seen and heard, then we set ourselves up to have connection. The other thing we don't know is, do we know if she went sliding in the winter? Do we know if she lived in Duluth? Do we know if anything she told us was accurate?
No.
Do we care?
No.
Not if the goal is connection. If the goal is connection, the content shouldn't matter. And that doesn't mean it shouldn't make us feel one way or another, because we love the person for whom we provide care, and it's sad when they don't remember. But if the goal is connection in that moment, it doesn't matter if all of that's accurate. They had a lovely interaction. I love when she says, "Esther and Alice," just out of the blue. Her sister died 70 years ago, and she still wrapped up her identity in having a twin sister. And did you notice his response? Yes, Esther and Alice, both twins, and you're Alice. What was the point of that? Validating. And I think it creates a lot of familiarity. I know you, I know you, I know you, I know you. I'm a familiar person. I know you, I know Esther, I know you're a twin. I know you, I'm a good guy. Makes me think of my buddy Bill from Dodge City. Always, every time, for years when he came to the day program, "Oh, there's my friend Bill from Dodge City." Never just Bill from Dodge City. That was important to him. And so when I say there's my friend Bill from Dodge City, I introduce myself as someone who knows him and knows something about him. I'm familiar, I'm safe. They were familiar, they were safe. So this next one, I'm going to just give a disclaimer. This is somebody who is at very, very late stages. And you can't, even if I turn the volume way up, there's a lot of what she says sounds really muffled. It's hard to hear her. I'll interpret. But watch the connection here. She's at the late stages of dementia. She's pretty darn confused, and they still have a lovely interaction. I'm going to try to skip.
They're with you a lot of the time in your memories.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So she says she's remembering her parents. She likes to think about her parents.
So that's why I picture them in my mind.
That's wonderful. I'm glad that you have that ability.
Well, I thank my parents for that.
They taught you that. And they gave you those memories. What do you remember most about your mother?
For sweetness.
How sweet she was? And I bet you got some of your sweetness from her.
Yes.
Good. And what do you remember most about your father?
Oh, he tried his best to bring certain things home to me.
Oh. And I bet you've tried hard in doing many things for others too.
Well, I've tried, but there's some things that I don't do because my mom and dad don't care for it. So I figure I don't want to do that. I want.
So you try to make your parents proud and make your parents happy too. That's good. I bet they're very proud of you. You're smiling.
Yes.
I'm happy that you're smiling.
Thank you.
Makes me smile too, do you see?
Yes, I see.
Good.
But you're a very nice person yourself.
Thank you. I think you're a very nice person also. And you're teaching us a lot right now too.
Well, I'm glad to hear you mean something to me.
They do. I think you're helping a lot of people right now. Thank you.
You're a very fine person.
So are you.
I have been showing this video multiple times a year for 15 years, and I still get goosebumps and a little misty when I watch that. It's one of the loveliest human interactions I've ever seen. And she's at the late stages of dementia. So there's a whole lot of possibility for communication and connection, even when someone has dementia, even when they're in the late stages, if we plug into where they're available to connect. The beginning when we first started, I couldn't get it right to the spot where I like to start it because with the DVD you got to skip. But the beginning, he doesn't even wait around to hear, her talk, introduce her parents. He just from the get-go says, "Oh, are your parents living or are they deceased?" And she says, "They're still living, thank the Lord." And that's his cue. She didn't say they're still living and I'm just watching the clock because I want to get my hands on that inheritance. Well, she could have. They're still living, thank the Lord. Oh, note to self, her parents are really important to her. And so he talked a lot about her parents. What do you remember most about your mother? Her sweetness. And then her gaze fell. What do you remember most about your father? How he always did his best to bring certain things home to me. And then her gaze fell. She's so advanced, she can't even stay present in the conversation. This looked like a breeze, but he was working really hard to keep her engaged. He says to her, "You're smiling." And he doesn't even take for granted she's aware of that, but he's not going to let her get out of this interaction without knowing. "You're smiling. That makes me smile too. Do you see?" Giving her such a huge sense of value and purpose. I can't think of a better purpose than to cause someone else to smile. And he gave that to her. He made sure, this could have been a lovely interaction. He didn't need to say that. But he kind of just put gravy on the plate. He made sure that she knew in that moment that she was still able to cause him to smile. She still had that ability, confused as she is. She still had some more. That makes me smile, do you see? I'm glad to know Oh no, she says, you're a very fine person. And he says, I think you're a very fine person too, and you're helping a lot of people right now. And she's probably been dead for years and years and years. I've been showing this video for 15 years. And it was made before I started. And she's still helping all of us. What a huge purpose. I'm glad to know I mean something to you. You do, and you're helping a lot of people right now. Now, sometimes people will say to me, well, she doesn't seem that confused.
She's way out of it.
She's responding to his techniques. He's not asking her about what she had for breakfast this morning. He's not asking her to rely upon short-term memory that she doesn't have. He's meeting her where she is. He's not contradicting her. He's giving her a sense of value and worth, and they're having a lovely connection at this level. My point for today, and I hope that if you walk away with nothing else, you walk away understanding that behavior is purposeful and that we always have a foot in the door to connect. Communication is always possible if we keep it in context. Thank you all for being here. Take care. Yes, you had a question and then you.
I was just wondering, so in dementia, at some point they lose long-term memory also? Not just
It kind of goes back in time. She didn't write an essay on her father. Her mother, her sweetness, 2 words. So she didn't have a lot of detailed memory. She had a feeling about her mother. When I think about my mother, I remember she was sweet. It was more feeling-based. Also with my father, how he worked his best to bring certain things home to me, that gives me no information. I have no data from that. I don't know what he did, how he worked, what things he brought home. It's more a feeling. My dad cared about me and worked hard because he loved me. I felt loved by them and they treated me well. That's more feeling-based. If you haven't signed in before you leave today, please come up and sign in. I'm happy to answer a few more questions. Yeah.
The documentary